Ronald Coase, 1910 to 2013, a British economist and Nobel laureate, made profound contributions to economic thought, particularly concerning transaction costs and property rights. His most famous contributions are encapsulated in two seminal articles, The Nature of the Firm, 1937, and The Problem of Social Cost, 1960. While often referred to as Coase theory, his work is more accurately represented by these two distinct, yet interconnected, insights. Let's break down Coase's contributions in detail. I. The Nature of the Firm, 1937. Why do firms exist? Before Coase, traditional economic theory, neoclassical economics, largely focused on markets as the primary mechanism for coordinating economic activity. It assumed that all transactions could be efficiently carried out through market exchanges, guided by prices. Coase famously asked, if markets are so efficient, why do firms exist? Why do we have large organizations where resources are allocated by managerial command rather than by price signals? Coase's answer, transaction costs. Coase argued that the existence of firms is explained by transaction costs. These are the costs associated with using the market to conduct economic activities. They are not the costs of production, like labor or raw materials, but rather the costs of organizing production through the market. Types of transaction costs, as identified by Coase and later elaborated. 1. Search and information costs, the costs of finding out what you need, who supplies it, and at what price. E.g., searching for a reliable web developer, comparing quotes. 2. Bargaining and negotiation costs, the costs of drawing up contracts, haggling over terms, and reaching an agreement. E.g., legal fees, time spent negotiating clauses. 3. Contracting and enforcement costs, the costs of ensuring that the terms of the contract are met, monitoring performance, and taking legal action if there's a breach. E.g., monitoring a freelancer's progress, going to court. The firm as a mechanism to economize on transaction costs. Intuition. Imagine a construction project. Instead of hiring every carpenter, plumber, and electrician as independent contractors for each specific task, and negotiating a new contract with them every day, a construction company hires these individuals as employees. When they are employees, the company directs their work through a simpler, overarching employment contract. Coase's argument, firms arise because it is often cheaper to organize certain activities within a hierarchical structure, the firm, rather than constantly using the market. When you hire an employee, you enter into one broad contract for a period of time, delegating the right to direct their activities within that period. This saves on the repeated search, negotiation, and contracting costs that would be incurred if every single task were mediated by the market. The optimal size of the firm. Coase also proposed that a firm will grow until the marginal cost of organizing an additional transaction within the firm equals the marginal cost of carrying out that same transaction via the market. Intuition. As a firm gets larger, it faces increasing managerial costs, e.g., bureaucracy, communication breakdowns, loss of incentives. At some point, it becomes more expensive to manage an activity internally than to outsource it to the market. The firm's boundaries are thus determined by this trade-off between internal organizing costs and external transaction costs. Significance of the nature of the firm. Foundation of new institutional economics. Coase's work provided the bedrock for the field of new institutional economics, which examines the role of institutions, contracts, and organizational structures in economic activity. Explains the existence and boundaries of firms. It offered a fundamental economic rationale for why firms exist at all and what determines their optimal size and scope. Introduced transaction costs. He effectively introduced the concept of transaction costs into mainstream economic analysis, highlighting that market exchange is not costless. 2. The Problem of Social Cost, 1960, the Coase Theorem. This is arguably Coase's most famous and often misunderstood contribution. It addresses the issue of externalities, situations where the actions of one party impose costs or benefits on a third party who is not directly involved in the transaction, e.g., pollution, loud music. Before Coase, the standard solution for negative externalities, championed by Arthur Pigou, was government intervention in the form of taxes, Pigouvian taxes, or regulations. Coase's challenge to Pigou. Coase argued that Pigouvian taxes, which assume a clear polluter and victim, often misdiagnose the problem. He saw externalities as a reciprocal problem. The problem is to avoid the more serious harm. In other words, stopping pollution harms the polluter, just as allowing it harms the victim. The goal is to achieve the most efficient outcome for society as a whole. The Coase theorem, under ideal conditions. The Coase theorem states that if property rights are clearly defined and transaction costs are zero or negligible, then private parties can bargain among themselves to reach an efficient solution to an externality problem, regardless of how the property rights are initially allocated. Key conditions for the Coase theorem to hold: zero transaction costs. 1. Well-defined property rights. It must be absolutely clear who owns what rights, e.g., the right to pollute or the right to clean air. 2. Zero transaction costs. There are no costs involved in searching for parties, negotiating a deal, or enforcing the agreement. This is the most crucial and often unrealistic assumption. 3. Small number of affected parties. If there are too many people involved, the costs of coordinating and bargaining become prohibitive. 4. Perfect information. All parties have full knowledge of the costs and benefits involved. Illustrative example: Coase's farmer and rancher. Scenario 1. Rancher has the right to let his cattle roam. If the cattle stray onto the farmer's crops and cause damage, the farmer can offer to pay the rancher to fence his cattle or reduce his herd. If the cost of the damage to the farmer is greater than the cost for the rancher to fence, a deal will be struck and the fence will be built. Scenario 2. Farmer has the right to be free from cattle damage. The rancher now has a choice: pay the farmer for the right to let his cattle stray, or build a fence. If the cost of the damage, or the farmer's willingness to accept payment, is less than the cost of the fence, the rancher will build the fence. The outcome: in both scenarios, if transaction costs are zero, the efficient outcome, e.g., the fence being built if it's cheaper than the damage, will be achieved through private bargaining. The initial allocation of rights only affects who pays whom, but not whether the efficient action is taken. The crucial implication: when transaction costs are positive. Coase's true insight in The Problem of Social Cost was not that transaction costs are zero, but precisely the opposite: that transaction costs are rarely zero in the real world, and when they are significant, the initial assignment of property rights does matter for efficiency. If it's too costly for the farmer and rancher to negotiate, then who initially has the legal right will determine the outcome. If the rancher has the right to let cattle roam and bargaining is too hard, the farmer simply suffers the damage. If the farmer has the right to be free from damage, the rancher will have to take action or cease operations. Policy implication: when transaction costs are high, the role of law and government is to assign property rights in a way that minimizes the costs of the externality or facilitates the most efficient outcome. This might mean assigning liability to the party who can avoid the harm at the lowest cost, or it might mean creating institutions that reduce transaction costs, e.g., pollution permits. Significance of The Problem of Social Cost. Revolutionized environmental economics and law in economics. It provided a powerful framework for analyzing externalities and proposing market-based solutions, rather than solely relying on government regulation. Emphasized property rights. It highlighted the critical role of well-defined property rights in achieving efficient resource allocation, particularly in the presence of externalities. Underlined the importance of transaction costs. Its most profound lesson is that transaction costs are a pervasive and crucial element of economic reality, often preventing efficient outcomes. This led to a deeper understanding of market failures. Critique of Pigouvian taxes. While not rejecting Pigouvian taxes outright, Coase's work demonstrated that they were not the only or always the best solution, especially when private bargaining could be more efficient. Coase's enduring legacy. Ronald Coase was a champion of analyzing real-world economic problems with simple, yet profound, insights. He urged economists to look beyond abstract models and consider the institutional framework within which economic activity occurs. His work laid the foundation for modern institutional economics and significantly influenced fields like environmental economics, public finance, and law and economics. He fundamentally changed how economists think about firms, markets, and the role of government in addressing market failures.